I think I mentioned when we opened up that since 20 years ago when the Northwest Forest Plan, there's been a lot of new science, a lot of new issues, new environment. I think climate change is one of those, and carbon sequestration is one of those issues that will need to be discussed for plan revisions. How big of a role it'll play, I guess, will depend on how much the people want us to have that play a role, so we'll see. So our next speaker, we have a little bit of a change in plan. There was actually a death on the Willamette last night. Tim Leahy is not here, not because it was him. Tim here is not here because he's providing some support. He was a timber program manager, or is, on the Willamette National Forest. He was going to tag team a talk with Chris Sexton, who is the natural resources staff on the Umpqua National Forest. And so she's kindly seen his talk and is going to pitch hit for him this morning. So we really appreciate her doing that, and I'll owe her 2 chocolate bars instead of 1. Their task was to talk about, well, so this is the black and white, as Nancy just stated, of what's in the Northwest Forest Plan, but what are we actually implementing out on the ground? And it's not necessarily the same thing. I think we're probably implementing more of a subset than the entirety, but that's what Chris and Tim are going to talk to us about next. So help me welcome Chris Sexton.
So in my crazy busy schedule and Tim's crazy busy schedule, we actually, to say we coordinated would be a vast overstatement. But we did talk a couple times, and yesterday afternoon he ran through we ran through each other's PowerPoints over the phone. And since that was less than 24 hours ago, I think I might still remember a little of what he said. So I can represent some of his intent, I think, for his presentation. And 2 questions. Is what we're doing sustainable given our current management paradigm? And what are the consequences of continuing plantation thinning? Well, I think I missed. No, I didn't. So the answer to the first question is no. And Tim and I thought it was really generous of Cheryl to give us a half hour when really I could be done right now. So we added a few more things to kind of paint the picture. So, and the other thing I'll say is that Tim and I both have been in our jobs for about 1.5 years. So we're talking about a history that isn't our history. So I'm telling you a story about other people's decisions. But I will tell you that one of the things I know for sure is I know a lot more about the Umpqua than I do about the Willamette. So it's a good thing he put some words on the slides. The forest is 1.7 million acres. You can see his numbers there. I do know that in the Northwest Forest Plan, the 1990 Willamette Forest Plan, the ASQ is 491 million board feet per year. And that was coming off about 700,000 acres of suitable lands. Tim told me yesterday that they're running their program off of about 400,000 acres now. So this is the history of harvest on the Willamette as far as Tim's been able to find. And you can see that during the height of the timber days after World War II, the Willamette was creating a lot of managed stands for the future. Yeah, and their harvest in the Willamette fell off right at the beginning of the 90s, which is similar to what happened with the Umpqua. So if I understand this slide correctly, what Tim's point here was that right now, the timber program on the Willamette is coming off about 350,000 acres, which is about 21% of the forest. And they're treating about 4,000 acres annually. This slide talks about their target, which is the green line, versus what they've been able to achieve, which is the red line. And what Tim's point with this slide is that they've had some ups and downs, but over the last more than 10 years, over the last decade, they've been able to put out a pretty consistent, pretty stable program, which is a desirable thing. This puts numbers and words to what you saw before on the graph. It's about 66 million board feet per year and $5.6 million revenue, which is nice. So I have a graph kind of like this for the Umpqua too. It looks a little different. This is what Tim thinks that that the Willamette can put out over the next 50. Well, he goes all the way to 2080. So, and you can see that they have a sustainable program at about the levels that they're at now, up until for about 50 years. Well, about 35 years, and then not so much anymore if you're renting it out of the plantations. Same thing, different graph. So that's kind of the end of what Tim had. And if I can figure out how to use this mouse, I can talk about the Umpqua. Maybe. From the beginning.
Just hit F5. Oh, there you go.
Okay. So I wanted to remind myself and you that the Umpqua isn't just about trees. It's also about water. So to put the circumstance of the Umpqua in context, I wanted to talk a little bit about the community that the Umpqua resides in. The Umpqua is in Jackson County a little bit, Lane County about a quarter, and mostly in Douglas County. Douglas County, Roseburg is the county seat of Douglas County, and the city's motto is still today that it's the timber capital of the world. The world. So you know, it's a 3.2 million acre county that encompasses the entire Umpqua watershed, and of that, about 25% is the Umpqua, and another 25% is BLM. So there's a lot of federal land in Douglas County. I don't have a graph for it like Tim did, but at the height of the timber production in Douglas County, there were 278 mills across the county. I don't know how many mills there are now, but my timber staff says that that Douglas County still has a mill capacity of 750 million board feet annually. The Umpqua's target, it's about 40 million board feet, give or take, so we're not filling up the mills there. So before the 90s, the Umpqua was harvesting about 340 million board feet annually, and that varied. I have done a little creeping around on the labyrinth of the O drive for the Umpqua, and I haven't been able to find the kind of data that Tim was sharing with you. But I do know that from about 70s on to the 90s, when our harvest dropped off, we were, you know, sometimes over 400 million board feet and sometimes under 300 million board feet, but 340 is about an average. Our 1990 forest plan gave us an ASQ of 334 million board feet, and I kind of thought that was, you know, it's a 1 million acre forest, give or take. I thought that was a pretty good size ASQ. I did look, like I told you, on the Willamette. They had 491 million board feet off of 700,000 acres of suitable. And I looked at the Siuslaw, which is a 630,000 acre forest, and I think their suitable timber lands was about 370 1,000 acres, and they had a cut just about the same as the Umpqua. So the Umpqua didn't have a really giant ASQ, but it wasn't tiny either. So what it did was it allowed us to create a lot of managed stands. And I know this isn't a very good map, but those yellow areas are the activity layer for the Umpqua that shows the kind of harvesting that we had done over the years. So, like I said, and Nancy said this also, what we've been doing on the Umpqua is mostly treating managed stands under 80, and that's been efficient for us, and we've been able to use the survey and manage exemptions, and we've been able to do designation by description marking, so our planning and our implementation has been more affordable, and we've been able to do that for quite some time. One of the things that I didn't really highlight that Tim said is that when they're out looking at their stands on the Willamette, what they're finding is about 50% of the areas that were previously harvested are no longer, we can't get into them for a variety of reasons. Some of it's access, some of it's other things. We've had the same experience on the Umpqua. We'll go into an area looking at thousands of acres and come out looking at considerably less. This table shows you some specific project areas, and it's about 54% reduction from the time we go into an area to the time we actually come out with a project for a variety of reasons. A lot of it is access. So this is where the Umpqua and the Willamette depart. This is the Umpqua right now, and you can see the green line is our current target, which isn't really true because our target goes up and down, and that the red bars indicate the plantations that might be available for harvesting. And this is supposing 10,000 board feet per acre, which is about where we need to be economical. And you can see that if we're going to meet this target, which is not the Northwest Forest Plan target, which is closer to 60 million board feet, we're not going to be doing it thinning plantations. The other thing about this particular graph is it doesn't have any spatial element to it. So these stands could be scattered all over the forest. They may not be juxtapositioned on the landscape in such a way that would make for a meaningful timber sale. So this is the Umpqua's challenge. The Willamette's got 35 years before their situation looks like this. And so I don't know whether it's better to be where Tim is on the Willamette, looking decades into the future, past his career. I suppose I have not met Tim, so maybe not. But it's certainly past, my career. I think it's challenging and exciting to be where we are on the Umpqua, but it might be it's a little daunting sometimes. So, if we are looking at unmanaged stands or managed stands that are older than 80, we are looking at a more complex and time-consuming situation. We're going to have more complex analysis. We're going to be doing survey and manage. We're going to have more complex prescriptions. It's going to be harder and more time-consuming to implement these kinds of treatments. And we're definitely going to have to take a look at whether or not we can do designation by description or whether we have to do some other kind of designation. And that's going to be an administration challenge too. Like I said, I could have probably found some more information on the O drive if I wanted to take that time, but I didn't. And so this isn't a particularly good visual, but what my point is here is that the Umpqua has been struggling to meet a reduced target through our plantations thinning, and that's just not going to get any easier. There's nothing better in our future with plantation thinning. So this is a little bit of what's going on for us that continues to complicate our story on the Umpqua, and that's that in 2013, I think it was actually in 2012, implemented in 2013, the new critical habitat went from 178,000 acres on the Umpqua to 596,000 acres. We have a lot of critical habitat. 60% of the forest is in critical habitat. And that doesn't totally juxtaposition over our LSR, as you can see. 268,000 acres of critical habitat now lays over our matrix lands. So this is what the Umpqua looks like. If you can, again, and not the best slide, but you can see that the kind of tan is our matrix, the green is our LSR. We've got some wilderness areas in there, and the red hatch, which you probably can't see really well, is the critical habitat. This is our matrix with critical habitat. And then you take out inventory roadless areas, and we have 135,000 acres of matrix lands. Probably not going to sustain a 40 million board foot program on that. And you put on top of that, that of those 135,000 acres of matrix lands, and you look at DBH and you look at basal area, we've got about just under 50,000 acres that look like they would be merchantable and economic to harvest. On top of that, for the Umpqua, we've had some fires. This is since the late 80s. So, you know, we're burning up that habitat, that critical habitat. And so I didn't put a picture on this slide because there is no visual for me on these consequences. There's no, you know, there's no pretty thing to say. The consequences of the choices that the Umpqua has made, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus because the Umpqua really did try to do a lot of different kinds of treatments with varying success. But the consequences of having managed all our plantations is that we're moving into something different. We're going to have a different business model, and that business model is going to be more expensive to plan. It's going to be more expensive to implement for sure. It's going to be vastly more challenging to administer. I mean, our sale administrators or our CORs or whoever's doing our administration is going to have a lot more complex environment to work in. It's going to be controversial for all the reasons that all of you know better than me, having probably been in Northwest Forest Plan forests for longer than I have. It's really highlighting on the Umpqua the need for collaboration so we can resolve some of our issues, so we can have some social license to do what we need to do. And another thing that I know Josh will talk about later on today is that we really are seeing on the Umpqua that we have some urgent needs, that we are losing important habitats to fire, and we are losing species that have greater resiliency to climate change and to fire. So, you want to ask Tim any questions? Andy.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned on that last slide there on the consequences of treating, getting out of the plantations, that they're more expensive to plant and more expensive to implement. Have you guys also considered that while they may be more expensive to plan, you guys will likely receive a higher dollar per thousand at the bidding table when you sell the timber?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Repeat the question for me. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. The question is that even though managing outside of plantations is going to be more expensive to plan and more expensive to implement, had we considered that we may get greater value from those stands, and yeah, we don't really have our head around it because, well, I'm not sure that we know exactly what we think we're going to do, but when we're looking at the stands that we might be going into, yes, we have considered that they may have greater value than our plantations.
Why are you only thinning stands when they hit the 60-year age mark? How come? What is the rationale for not treating stands under 60?
Well, and that was, I think, on the Willamette slides. There's an economics. So, you know, to be able to sell an economical sale, you have to have a certain volume to take off. I know on the Umpqua we do look at stands down to as young as, I'm going to say 40, but it becomes an economic issue. So I can't really respond to the absolute of 60 years on the Willamette, and maybe there's somebody here from the Willamette who could speak to that.
They go down to 40.
40, yeah. So it's an economics issue for us, and it's also, I think, whether or not the stands are going to benefit fully from the thin. I see you there.
If I understood you correctly, it looked like on the Umpqua you removed the entire critical habitat overlay from your harvest land base?
So the question is it true that the Umpqua has taken the entire critical habitat and removed it from our timber land base? And I would say no, we have not. We do consider treatments in critical habitat, but it's obviously for a different reason than we would in what we call matrix lands. But you know, so
your map seemed to imply that. I just want to say that would be an inconsistent reading, I think, of the critical habitat. Is that what the case?
So when I was talking about matrix, and that's when I probably inferred that we removed that, we would treat in the critical habitat, but it would have to be definitely to benefit owl and owl habitat.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm from the Siskiyou, and what I'm finding, working with people in the districts, that there are translations of requirements in the Northwest Forest Plan that I'm learning are not accurate. For instance, 15% retention applies only to regen harvest. And what I'm hearing from some folks out of the districts is 15% retention that is a non-treatment area applies to any kind of harvest. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing similar things, you know, in terms of interpretation of the Northwest Forest Plan requirements.
Okay, thank you for reminding me to repeat it.
Things you know that ain't so.
So the question is, are we seeing, I'm going to say misinterpretations, or inaccurate interpretations of the Northwest Forest Plan as we apply it across the Umpqua? And I'm sure, I'm going to shout out to my staff. I have a staff that is very knowledgeable about the Northwest Forest Plan. So I think that helps guide us to accurately and appropriately apply the Northwest Forest Plan. But I will also say, you know, year and a half in, I didn't grow up here. And I have some folks who are working out in the districts that are also new. So yeah, I think we probably struggle with that. And I think that the fact that I have good staff with good knowledge helps minimize that, but it could be happening.
Have you thought about doing, instead of thinning some of the plantations, doing a regeneration harvest to them?
We have thought about that. Oh, sorry. Have we thought about doing regeneration harvesting?
In the
plantations.
Instead of thinning them, because your projection's all based on thinning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think since I've been on the Umpqua, we have talked about regeneration harvest. The complexity and the controversy have kept us thinning. But, you know, that's probably, again, there's folks here from the Umpqua who could probably answer that better then why we have not done that.
Just to follow up, aren't you going to have to do a regeneration harvest someday?
So the question is, aren't we going to have to do a regeneration harvest someday
In the matrix?
in the matrix? No. I mean, I don't think we have to. I think we could. I think it might be something that we would want to consider, and I think that if we don't do regeneration harvesting, there may be consequences that we don't like. Maybe not if we keep having fires, but I don't think that we have to.
Yeah, you mentioned the controversy around doing clear-cut harvest. Can you clarify, is that controversy with the public or somewhere else?
So what? Yeah. So the question is, what is the controversy around doing regeneration harvesting?
Or who's it with?
Who's it with? I think it's with the public. I don't know that I think it's so much internally. I think the controversy internally is how much early cereal do we need, and what does early cereal have to look like? But again, I mean, I have really smart people working for me who are talking about that. So I don't know that there's as much of an internal controversy as there is an external controversy, and I think that there might be more of an internal hesitation to go there. When, I mean, like I said, the Umpqua has no choice. I mean, we have to do something different because we can't keep doing what we're doing. But if I were on the Willamette, I would be wondering, when do I want to tackle that?
Can you explain how you're reconciling your compliance with the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act that requires you to manage your land sustainably, if you don't think that you have to incorporate regeneration harvest back into your program?
So the question is, let's see, the way I understood the question is, how is the Umpqua, or I guess for that matter, the Willamette, redeeming our obligations for multiple use if we're not, if I don't think that we have to do regeneration harvest. So I guess I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, but what I would say is that I don't know that the way I view multiple use is that clear cutting is one of those multiple uses. Timber harvesting is, but I don't know that clear cutting is. So I think that the ecological question that we're asking on the Umpqua is, how much early cereal do we need? And how do we get that early cereal? And I am not saying that clear cutting isn't a tool that we would consider.
I'm talking about the sustained yield basis.
Of multiple use?
Sustained yield of timber, sustained yield of whatever. I mean, I guess you've answered in terms of, you said that what you're doing now is not sustainable.
Well, we can't sustain a program. And I would argue, and I think my staff would argue, that we can't sustain the ecological systems on the landscape with what we're doing. So I don't know what our future is. I know what we're looking at, and you know, like I said, Josh is going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon. So.
Let me thank Chris and everybody for our thank you.